We've seen, I would say recently, some of our larger and higher end firms have done very well with a discovery phase or a discovery fee because you get so many new client inquiries that they may not necessarily be serious. But that initial presentation to a client can be very lengthy and time consuming. So it's really just locking somebody in and allowing you to even pick up $25,000, $50,000 for the initial discovery phase. And I think it's worked very, very well.
Well, we're excited to welcome Julia Nikishina back. Welcome, Julia.
Hi, thank you. Thank you. It's great to be back.
Yeah, it's fun when we get a returning guest, especially someone as an expert in your field such as yourself.
I don't know about that, but okay.
So Julia's owner, founder of New Age Financial Consulting, and specifically, I mean, you work with a lot of interior designers. Does that still continue to be the case? Have you opened up the scope of work for others yet?
No, but I am considering construction since the last time you and I
Ah,
spoke. It's and interesting. Like builder trend has been popping up in my on my radar, or just clients have been mentioning
yeah,
it. So every time I hear about it, I'm like, oh, that's right, Brad.
yeah.
Um, but not quite yet. So only interior designers, and then only interior designers who work with studio designer as a
So
as a as a fun catch.
yeah, so walk through the studio design. I mean, for us, as you mentioned, Builder Trend. I mean, I'm using Builder Trend, for us to manage our process. Studio design. Why is that important for the designers you work with?
So, I mean, it's a software that's been around for 30, I would say 30, 35 years or so. I mean, I'm in it about 20 years or so. It's really great in terms of accounting and project management for the interior design community, right? The interior design world. So they have an interesting business model similar to yours, right? Where it's, let's say 50%, and those percentages aren't exact, but for fees, anything having to do with design fees, right? And what they're charging for time. And then the rest of it is product. And so we're buying and reselling millions and millions of dollars of product. And to manage every single one of those granular pieces and components is very, very challenging. So Studio Designer allows us to do that, I would say seamlessly, but that's probably a bit of an over exaggeration. I mean, it's hard, right? It's hard work. You have to put every single finial in, every single curtain rod in, every single bath towel. You have to put in the details in, but if you put the details in, you get really good details out. I'm assuming very similar to Builder Trend.
Yeah, it's very similar. And the reason I want to go down this path is because, from attending, you and I met at design camp,
Mhm.
last year, and I found so much value attending these, conferences and trainings, whether it's interior design, whether it's architecture, and really anyone outside of our business, because, anyone that's heard me say this over and over, we're business owners that happen to focus in construction or happen to focus in interior design. The reality is the more we can understand about running a business, like the more valuable it is. And so what I wanted to ask you is because what's much more complicated for designers as opposed to maybe a cost plus contractor such as myself is, to your point, they're doing fee. So part of their business is fee, right? It's fee for design. There's hours involved that they're tracking to figure out whether they're charging by the square foot or hourly or
Mhm.
whatever it may be. Burden rates, I mean, are built in there. And so there's a couple ways that they're doing that, but at the same point, they have product. And for my business, I'm not a cash, I don't do taxes based on cash. I base it on accrual, right? Because depending on WIP and, year end, how I close things out, when you're working with a design firm, Julia, that is doing fee and product, do you have different strategies, cash or accrual? How is that different depending on if it's a product or if it's a fee?
Yeah, great question. So my answer to that is accrual only. And so for our tax clients too, who are either if they're already in Studio Designer or they're coming to us to work with us but are not yet in Studio and need to migrate from a different software and they haven't been filing accrual, that's one of the first things that we're going to look at and dissect to say how have you even been managing it on a cash basis? You almost have very little clue as to what's going on because of the timing, right? You could be receiving a $500,000 retainer in the month of December. I surely don't want to pick that up as income. I don't want to pay tax on it, right? I want that to live in deferred revenue. And
Yeah.
then I want to be able to track the actual income and cost of goods, as an example, in let's say 2025, when it actually processes it when it hits. So probably I'm assuming similar to Builder Trend, but Studio Designer is actually accrual only. And it's been a heated debate over the years, especially the recent years, of why isn't there a toggle to cash? Because if you think about QuickBooks, right, they have a toggle. I mean, everything is just a click of a button, right? And it converts from one to the other. But the original founder believed strongly that cash was just off the table. And so to this day, we're holding true to it. I'm so scared that somebody's going to turn that toggle on, right? And just really use it inappropriately. And so it's not an option. Everything lives in work in progress. You need to understand revenue recognition and really use it wisely. Because what if you're super profitable, and hopefully you are, in December? Do I really want to pick up an additional, X amount of revenue if I don't necessarily have to? And I feel confident, right? And I feel good about the decision of deferring it to a different tax year, even if it's just going from December to January, because it's going to have such an impact on my tax consequences.
You bring up some great points. I mean, the reality is, I mean, that planning is essential to your point because it's really hard to strategize whether it's new hires, whether it's vehicles, whether it's, I mean, there's a lot of items that all of us have in inventory that maybe there's purchases we can make that can offset that. I mean, these are purchases that we probably have to do, but depending on where budget is and profitability and revenue, we can make those decisions strategically. So it's much easier in January, to your point, as we're looking at the year projections, as opposed to December when we're trying to catch all, at these, some big AR bills, or deposits that are coming in.
Mm-hmm. We've been doing so. It's that time of year where it's March 3rd, which I can't believe.
Right.
But as 2024 is closing out, beginning our cash flow projections for 2025, because it's such an interesting concept to reconcile between cash and accrual, right? Just because you're picking up revenue on your accrual statement has nothing to do if the cash came in the door a year ago. But then also to really understand what our total expenses are for the year, and are we covering those expenses with fees? Are we making enough in fees to cover all of our expenses? And then if we're not, how are we covering the shortfall? The automatic, right? Like the next answer to that is, well, of course we sell product, so we have our profit on product. But I think that can change in different firms in terms of how they're marking up. Do they mark up? Is it a flat percentage? Does it depend on the category? Where in construction and in architecture, it's a bit different, right? It's just usually goes as a percentage. Well, your fees go a percentage of construction, I would imagine, typically. And then product fees are negotiated, so it's all on the table.
You bring up a good point that I want to touch on. I mean, a point that you made, Julia, is you spoke about, are the fees enough to cover expenses, and how that applies to me as a business owner is, in construction, is a lot of us may look at a job, say cost plus, and we may say we're making money, right? Or we think we're making money,
Mhm.
but is the cost plus covering my supervision and labor, my overhead? Is it covering, do I have a separate line item for that I'm charging for the client so that I can staff properly? As that applies to design, you may have some designers that are like, hey, I'm charging design fee. I'm not really tracking, the hours my team and design assistants and those that are doing CAD, the time they're putting in, but I'm offsetting it with product. But really the strategy is like, you shouldn't be offsetting your fees of product. You
Mhm.
should be offsetting your fee based on the fee it takes you to design something. You should be tracking that so you know what that is, so that the product, right, is above and beyond.
Well, and a lot we like to sell it. That's really funny, right? To the design firm or the principal to say, okay, well, your product profit should be your additional distributions
Hmm.
or owner's drop. But that's like above and beyond what we're already calculating for your fixed, whether if you're an S corp, your salary, and then if you're not, if you're taking a drop, what's that number that you need? That goes into our cash flow projection. And then anything that you are making above and beyond on product is just extra. And it not only is it extra for you personally, but it could be extra to cover an additional design event or something that you're looking to do. You're looking to rebrand the website, but like these big ticket sort of out above and beyond expenses, that's a great way to, I think, structure the business to set you up for success.
Yeah, because if you're strategizing it in that way, Julie, I mean, to your point, if they have additional revenue coming from product, now your strategy changes a little bit. Maybe you're buying your building, maybe you're buying your warehouse, right? You're creating assets, brick and mortar, that will allow you the longevity to stay in business, that you can now depreciate, and you have, property. I mean, the
Mhm.
reality is you're trying to diversify as much as possible. The point being is that as a business owner, your goal is to stay in business and thrive so that you can serve your clients at the end of the day.
Do you make everyone on your staff track time? And does Builder Trend have that functionality in the software?
That's a great question. So we are obsessed with time, and Builder Trend does have time cards and they track it. So Builder Trend, what's great about it is every single employee that I have tracks their time. Now we're all salary, but regardless, we still track our time. And in my contract with our clients, we do have set hourly rates depending on title or position, if you
Mhm.
will, whether it's estimating, whether it's project coordination, whether it's project manager, whether it's superintendent. And so we have these rates that agree upon with the clients, and they track their time cards based on the time put in the project. And this is something that took me a long time to really understand as a business owner is that I should, when I'm estimating a project, I should have a line item for everyone that's going to touch that job from beginning to end. The amount of time that's going to take on their time cards as they're working through each month. And I have to now track this financially so that way the client has an expectation of, hey, when you hire AFT, you're going to have a team assigned. You're going to have a superintendent, a project coordinator, an assistant labor and a PM. And how many hours, what percentage of their salary do I need to bank them, if you will, on this job, on this project over a 1 or 2 year duration so that I can set an adequate budget for the client. But the point being is that I should be able to expense all of my labor for my managers to the project. So then that way the cost plus now is working as far as, to your point, rent or overhead
Mhm.
or building or operations or infrastructure or some of the line items that maybe not hit a job, maybe accounting in some cases, maybe estimating. There's my salary, for example. I mean, there's going to be items of running the business that just don't hit that job, and I have to account for that.
So, two questions, if I may.
Yeah, please. I'm glad this is much better conversation. So yeah.
So, are you typically, or is the salary structure of the staff set up where you're billing them out three times? They're either a base salary or total compensation package.
It's great. I hope to get to 3x at some point. I mean, I would say realistically, in most cases, 2x or maybe
Sure.
2.5.
Okay.
I'm not at 3. I mean, I'd love to be that way, just being open here. But the reality is that I do, to your point, Julia, I do have a burden rate that's set based
Mhm.
on salary, based on vehicle, based on 401k match, based on healthcare, based on end of year incentives, bonuses and cost increase, increase of living and so forth. And so that's factored in. Cell phones are part of that. So we do have a burden rate that does capture our true overhead that is agreed upon with the client and then works with the overall budget of the project.
Yeah.
Does that
So
answer that for you?
yeah, no, no, that's
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's definitely so. I think yes, I think three times X is. I don't want to say aggressive because I don't know if that's the right word
It's
for it.
ideal. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do think it's ideal. And I also
Best
think it's
case.
important to look at it two ways, though, right? So in your salary chart, hopefully you have just your base salaries for everyone. And then you have and then all the other columns, right? For all the other costs that you have, like you mentioned, their 401k, their cell phone reimbursements, et cetera. So then you have their total compensation, right? And so what's the three times X of the salary? And then what's the three times X of the total compensation? And then I think if you like look at both of those numbers, and then if you have a cash flow set up to show your total expenses monthly and then annually, those target numbers usually should be very aligned. Like if your salaries are $1 million and you're saying to yourself, okay, well, we should then have 3 million in design fees, as an example, on the design firm. If I then also do have a cash flow and I go through the process of going through a cash flow, my expenses will be relatively close to the $3 million, like all in. And they should be a little bit under. They really should be. But the math winds up being relatively accurate, right? If you do all of those calculations. The other thing that I would be interesting, actually, from your perspective, is employee utilization. So, do you look at that?
Now,
Sorry.
yeah,
Yeah. Sorry.
define employee
Yeah.
utilization. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it's based on maybe their efficiency. It's based on, um, how long it takes them to do certain tasks. It's based on, how they differentiate from others in the company. I mean, am I missing something?
No, no. So that's a great starting point. So we look at employee utilization, especially in the design industry, as billable and non-billable. So, and you want your highest paid individuals to be highly billable because they're
Right.
generating a much higher rate than a junior support staff or an administrative staff whose base salary is just a lot lower. So, in terms of, especially if you have firms that are tracking time and are good at it, because there's a difference between tracking time and then tracking time and doing it well, right? I mean, that's just fact. out of the 2080 hours in a work year, how many of those hours is your project manager, as an example? How many are they bill? How many are they billing? And what ratios? And in different industries, I do think that there's different targets. What ratios are ideal for that person in that position? So, for example, in a design firm, we encourage would be the word, right? We encourage the senior designers or like a design director to be highly billable, right? They have a much higher compensation package. They could be the 100, 150, 200, 250. So they should be 80 to 90% billable. While juniors would be like 60 to 70% billable. And then obviously you may have an admin on staff that's like 20 to 30% billable. But what happens too if different staff work different amount of annual hours? So like I use myself as an example often. I am not somebody who works 2080 hours. I'm typically
Right.
working 60 hours a week. So actually if you looked at me as an employee, my utilization would be amazing because I'd be 100% billable, right? I'm working so many hours over 40 that my 40 hours are billable. And so, but then it becomes tricky. Like, what's the expectation with staff, especially salaried staff? And then you have difficult states, as an example, like New York, where you can't force somebody to work over 40 hours, right? You certainly want staff to be, productive and efficient. But I think a lot of that is maybe like internal, right? Like that comes from you from within, whether you're somebody who wants to be that way or you're somebody who's and you don't.
Well, I think there's the truth of that. I mean, there's burnout too, right? I mean, you can burn out your employees if
Yes.
they're working too much,
Oh,
if they feel
yes.
there's too much. I would be curious, to know maybe from a design perspective why maybe a junior designer is only 60% billable. And before you answer that, I mean, as that applies to me, I do understand from an employee utilization from billable and non-billable. That's something I heavily track in this sense is that ideally, my superintendent, my project coordinators, my project manager, director of operations, that they're 100% billable to the jobs, right? They're out there. I've factored that in depending on how many jobs we have across all our platforms at AFT, the personnel we have. So ideally, I would say in most cases, 90 to 95% of my staff is billed to every project, right?
Oh,
So
wow.
that's, yeah, which is good. But there is a portion of estimating, right, that I have to say, okay, I have estimators full time, which not every residential builder has. And I can't bill them maybe as the job's going vertical. So I have to strategize how I'm billing pre-construction, as we're engaged in pre-con and doing estimating and budgeting and, working with the designer and architect through that pre-con experience that could be 12 months. That's where I can offset. And again, going
Oh,
back to
wow.
that utilization, I'm billing retainers or deposits on pre-con that have nothing to do with vertical construction that covers that pre-con element, right, to offset that labor. So there's different ways to factor that. But as far as vertical construction goes, I am limited to some extent. I mean, again, some builders will build everything. I mean, in commercial construction, I can tell you that these large commercial builders, the McCarthy's of the world, the Hensel Phelps of the world, they're building the safety guy, the engineering, the project engineer, they're building office staff. I mean, they may do cost plus 5% or cost plus 8% or cost plus 3% on some of these massive $100 million projects, but they have so many general condition line items. Like they may scope out 35 personnel on that project that they're billing, hourly. So there's different ways to handle it for sure. But going back to maybe your perspective, Julia, when you're working with the designer and you're saying maybe a junior designer is not fully billable, is that because of experience, lack thereof? Is it because of, how are you seeing that where maybe they're not getting 100%?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it's because there are definitely certain tasks associated with an interior design project from beginning to end that are not directly billed to a client. So, and if those tasks exist, you don't want your most senior level person handling it. You want your junior person handling it. And then depending on the size of the office, not everyone, even some of our larger offices, let's say 10 people, 15 people, 20 people, they may not necessarily have a full time designated admin person on staff. I think some do, but I don't necessarily, like even our big New York offices, that's not the norm anymore. And whether COVID really shifted sort of those responsibilities to the other office personnel. And so then you will have a junior designer stocking your kitchen or making sure that the trash is taken care of or making sure that the light bulbs are replaced or et cetera, et cetera. So they're just doing some more of the mundane tasks that there may not be somebody in the office doing that you certainly again don't want a senior designer completing.
It makes complete sense. And I think really, the overall arching theme, as you mentioned, which really kicked us off, Julie, is you said, ideally you're taking that salary at 3x, right? Or whatever that overhead is at 3x, which is the most ideal scenario. And I think all of us, I'm sure the design firms that you're working with, Julia, there's a vast array of differences, whether time in the market, notoriety, the value that they can maybe charge in the marketplace, the cost that they can charge. Same for me, right? As our business is growing and our value becomes more presentable to the client, then it definitely changes the revenue or maybe what we can charge the client. And where I'm going is that as we have credibility, time in the market, demand, all these things, and we showcase the value that we bring to the client that is much more than maybe just the bottom line or the price, that definitely allows us to work through that burden rate, work through that charge. Maybe, efficiencies and systems and protocol maybe allow that design firm to, even some of those mundane tasks, be able to assign those so that they are billing more, even for a junior designer. But at the end of the day, we're trying to create value. And with that value, then we can ideally, hopefully increase our fee a bit more.
Mhm. Do you ever are you ever in a contract with a fixed fee?
It's a great question. I've had clients. Let me take it to this point. I mean, up to this point, I've had two projects with a fixed fee. I'm not a fan of that, unless it's maybe a spec home or an investment where the margin's different, right? Because maybe you're giving them what's called a lump sum. So, Julie, if you were to come to me and say, "Okay, Brad, I want to do a custom home with you," there's really two main options for you as my client. You can say, I just want to know what the cost is for my home. I don't want to be dealing with the market. If steel goes up or tariffs hit us, from Canada, for lumber, I don't want to be part of that. You just need to tell me what's going to cost to build my home so I can budget and we're going to be done. Change orders to the side, but just as far as the basic scope. And I may go to you and say, that's fine, Julia. I'm going to factor in a house, a number of 2 million to build your house. Oh, between you and I, it may only cost me 1.4, may cost me 1.3, may cost me 1.7. But at the end of the day, I'm taking the risk as a builder. I'm trying to get to a common ground for you to agree to that price. And so it's a set fee or a set cost. And that margin will fluctuate depending on how efficient I can build, the product I can maybe buy in advance, how, there's so many variables that go into building. But I'm taking the risk at the end of the day. So I'm going to build margin across the board because I have the potential of being exposed all throughout, unless I'm, again, a caveat of having maybe an exclusion, depending on cost variation, maybe within 5 or 10% of original bid. I mean, don't want to go too far down this path, but point being is that, or I do the cost plus where you take the risk, but the advantage for you as the client is that you're seeing my books, if you will. You could audit me, you can see the invoices, you can see what I'm paying out every month. There's a lot more paperwork, but I'm saying, okay, Julie, this is how I'm paid. You're going to pay this much for supervision labor. You're paying the cost plus. And then as you make selections, we're going to move that around. My margin in most cases is smaller than a spec home, but there's a lot of security for me as a builder because I'm getting paid every 30 days. And no matter what the market does, I'm pretty set based on what we agreed to for my fee.
So questions.
Yeah.
In the $2 million scenario,
Yeah.
are you disclosing actual cost at all in
No.
no, not at all. Okay.
No, so that's the whole thing is that, and the builder shouldn't. I mean, the reality is if the client wants you to take the risk as the builder should be adamant to say, no, this is the cost of the build. And now it's up to me to negotiate the contracts and buy it out and negotiate to the best of my ability. The risk for the client is not only there, again, not that the client should dictate the margin, but the problem for the client is that the builder could come back and pick some similar product that maybe looks the same but is different. You're going to see that a lot in spec homes. The client that's going to buy a spec home, these investors and builders are in most cases, not all, but I'd say in most cases, at least here in the Phoenix area specifically, they're putting in, I don't want to say inferior product, but definitely lower tier product because they're taking the risk of what the market will do, and they're going to put in less expensive product that looks nice so that they can have a bigger upside.
Are you familiar with Toll Brothers?
I am. Yeah, very much.
Yes. So they're a big Philadelphia, like right, Pennsylvania company, and hopefully I'm allowed to say this on a recorded line, right? But so many issues. Like we've had so many friends over the years buy Toll Brothers homes, and really the type of, unfortunately, quality with a new build is nowhere near, in my very small, opinion of where it really needs to be. So it's really interesting.
Well, again, I think across the board, not just Toll Brothers you mentioned, but I think we've seen for the last 3 or 4 years, any new home construction has been they've been hit really hard. Whether it's pricing, whether it's supervision, whether it's product and quality. I mean, I can tell you that so many builders are really struggling in that market because again, they're going from a set fee that maybe they banked on being too low and then they don't staff it properly. And, a lot of them are making money in the land more than they are the vertical construction. And so there's a lot of variables. And sometimes as that land is very expensive, it's harder, to price a product that's within reason that a client's willing to buy. And then they're really running it, you know, as tight as can be, we'll just say.
Mhm.
So across the board, Julia, this has been a common theme, except in custom. I mean, custom's totally different, but yes, in that production world, it's been a big challenge.
So if you're not in the $2 million fixed fee contract, you're in your other contract. Are you completely transparent about product prices?
Well,
And is a client allowed to audit you? Are they allowed to say, okay, well, you're telling me that lumber is X? I don't know how lumber is bought. I'm sorry, but lumber is X. Show me the backup documentation that you bought lumber at X.
yeah, and that's the strategy that builders have to understand is that when I made the decision to go cost plus, is I'm openly telling my clients that they can audit me at the end, right? That there's no kickbacks, there's no hey, Julia, you're my lumber supplier. You're going to give me an invoice for 200,000. I give to the client, but I'm going to pay you 180. Like that doesn't happen in my firm because they can't audit me. So it's very much negotiated on the front end to say, hey, that's why I'm adamant to put in my burden rate early in this conversation of what, hey, you're paying me 2x or 2.5x based on what the salary is to capture. And then I'm going to have my cost plus. And the reason I do that is because the client knows how I'm paid. But at the end of the day, yes, they are auditing. So the paperwork for me
Mhm.
is extensive. When I submit an owner bill once a month at the end of the month for the work complete or deposits that have to be made for cabinetry or windows, so forth, I have all the backup. I have every invoice, every lien waiver, for even as so much as Home Depot. If I go to Home Depot and buy, you know, wood shims and
Mhm.
caulking and anything to the house, it's on there. I mean, I've had it where it's had a tape measure and the client is going through 30 transactions at Home Depot saying, well, Brad, I think you should pay for the home, tape measure yourself. Most clients aren't that particular, but it does come up where they'll highlight it and be like, okay, that's fine. We'll cover that as part of our, cost of goods sold or to run the business. But the point being, Julia, to answer that is yes, they can audit me. I have everything line itemed. And the common question that a client will have for me at pre-construction is, okay, Brad, you're giving me this budget of 5 million for my house. How guaranteed is it going to be that we're going to be close to this 5 million by the end? And fortunately, we can buy out, we can contract 90 to 95% of this $5 million amount. But I tell them, hey, there's three line items in particular: framing lumber, trusses, hardware, um, which is all part of that framing category. Structural steel, right? The steel, because we have to buy steel in a lot of cases for the builds that we do, and drywall. Concrete I lock in for the year. There's a lot of things I lock in for the year, but those three specifically are at point of sale. So I may be bidding
Oh,
framing. Yeah. So I may be bidding framing for you today, Julia, but I may have 8 months of site work on the mountain. So I'm not ordering your lumber package until we're in March, probably till November. So if I'm telling you your lumber package is 200,000, well, in November it could be 250, it could be 175, but you're going to pay at point of sale when 7 days out from ordering that lumber. So there are line items I'll highlight just so the client is aware of what will be kicking that can down the road till we're ready for it.
will you ever will you ever give a fixed fee for a custom home, or is that just not feasible in terms of the scope and timing?
It's a great question. I definitely would. Again, but my margins. So let's just say, for example, let's say, Julie, if I'm doing a $5 million home, and let's just say for easy math, it's cost plus 15%, right? It's pretty straightforward. But I can tell you that if you're asking me for a fixed fee, I'm going to add margin on drywall. I'm going to add margin on insulation. I'm going to add margin on framing, on cabinetry. Pretty much every line item, I'm going to overinflate internally what that
Yeah,
cost
to cover
is
yourself.
because
Yeah.
I have to cover myself. And I
Yeah.
may win on drywall, I may win on paint, but I may lose on framing. But at least ideally, I'm winning on enough that it's going to offset that. So, yeah, on a fixed fee, I do it, but maybe my margin or my markup instead of cost plus 15, maybe cost plus 20 or 25 or 30. In the remodel world, just as an example, Julia, it's very rare to see a cost plus builder in renovations. So most remodel guys will come in or gals and say, okay, Julia, I'm going to do a remodel for 300,000.
Hmm.
And ideally they're trying to work at a 30-40%,
Hmm.
margin, right? Not just markup. So yeah, I would be willing to do that, but I wouldn't allow you to audit me at the end because if I'm taking the
Sure.
risk, if I'm
Yeah.
taking the risk, I take the risk. If you take the risk, yeah, you can audit me.
What about reselections? What does the contract verbiage say specifically around reselections for clients? On obviously on different finishes and et cetera.
Great question. So, and real, as I rewind a little bit, a lot of times with fixed fees, you'll see escalation clauses like we saw during COVID and the pandemic where things are skyrocketing 2 or 3x.
Hmm.
And I believe most states will allow like up to 10, like if it's within 10% of the original bid, then you have to eat it. But if it's over, you could have an escalation clause to offset it. But going back to your question here, as far as product reselection, yeah, I mean, we're very versed on, you have to have a detailed scope either way. You have to be very clear on the product you're putting in, the manufacturer, the quantities, the amount. I mean, scope of work is always going to protect you as a builder at the end of the day when there's a dispute. But most builders, and call it a change order, they may say in writing, any change order is 20 cost plus 25%. For cost plus, they may just say, if you do any changes to the original scope, I'm going to charge you 25% because there's, management or processing, there's errors that can come up. On a fixed fee, you're just open to interpretation. You may say, okay, Brad, I want to add a bathroom. I want to switch out my countertops. I'm going to present a price before it's done, but you may just see the total amount. Okay, on a fixed fee, and you're wanting to change out the countertops, I may say, okay, Julie, it's going to be $5,500, and you can accept it or you can reject it or say that's too high, or it may cost me 3,000. I'm charging you 55, but you're not going to know that. You're just going to know what the total cost is.
Do you cap the number? Have you ever capped the number of reselections?
Um, I, I never have because we're a custom builder, right? So we're going to do anything the client wants. But I've probably had projects over 100, 200, like change orders, like
Oh wow.
reselections. I mean, major, major on big projects. It's really hard to tell the client they have a limited amount because they're willing to spend. So, but we do have to have conversations on how that impacts schedule and duration and turnover, um, to them moving in, because that's the one thing I think a lot of us builders fail in communication is setting the expectation that, yes, we can do these changes, but it's going to affect the duration. And so one thing that we've really put a focus on is when you come to me, Julia, with changes to your home, is that I'm putting in duration days, like how that's going to impact the schedule. So at the end of the project, not only are you paying a fee for the actual changes, but you're also signing off that, hey, we've added 30 days to the build schedule. Because what most builders fail at is they do these changes, which do affect us. We don't communicate with the client. And now the client's like, why am I moving in 60 days after you committed
Mhm.
to? Well, you made 100 changes. Well, how did that impact you? And if we don't communicate that, it's really tough to keep the client happy.
That probably goes or stems into so like even my industry, but the design industry specifically too, where I think like if I use myself as an example, I try to communicate like I do, right? I mean, I we try to communicate and we try to pinpoint things, and then sometimes you just I think you lack or you forget or things get busy. But on in the design side, it's the same. Like if somebody reselects a custom sofa 3 times, what I mean, then that happens. That's why
It does.
I actually think in the design world, I mean, we typically see caps on reselections, typically in contracts, not all the time, but most of the time. But it has such a lasting impact on the entire project. And unless the firm is very, very clear and good about the communication, it really just tends to fall apart. With a client being really unhappy, right, and not understanding what consequences they did by making again a silly sectional or a sofa or the fabric, but the fabric's back ordered and without great communication. But that goes, like I said, any industry, my industry, then it could all fall apart quickly.
Well, it's really tough. I mean, to your point, Julia, I mean, I think what's really tough for the design community is for an interior designer, they have to be very specific at that design phase of how many reselections they can make that they're just going to cover.
Yeah.
Because you may have a client design a home that's like, we want all matte black plumbing fixtures. And then they come back and they're like, you know what? Actually, we want to do rose gold, you know? And so now you're changing the entire aesthetic.
Yeah.
And now you got to change tile and countertops and cabinetry most likely. And so, most designers, I would imagine, at least my experience has been, they do set a limited number of revisions after they give those, initial design renderings and spec book to the client, within reason
Well, and especially if you're in a fixed fee project, which there's so much debate, should you on the design side be fixed fee, or hourly?
or
But
hourly. Yeah.
you're in a fixed fee, right? What are all of those hours spent on all of the reselections? What do you do with those, right? Unless again you're very clear about that it'll be additional charges and it's broken out in your contract. But I think it's very hard on the design side, probably much harder than in your space, right? Um, to make the client happy while doing something with these revisions that are then also costing you all these dollars on the back end.
It's way more difficult. I mean, I think it's way more difficult for the designer. The reason being, if I'm a fixed fee builder and you come to me, Julie, and say, I want to change the tile and countertop, it's pretty easy for me to say, here's the cost to do it. And that it's just straightforward. I mean, it's really hard for the designer who's designed this beautiful kitchen and the client comes back and says, you know what, I really don't like that cabinet hardware. I don't like the countertop. I've given it some thought. I want to change it. And it's really hard from a customer service to be like, okay, we'll just do it as customer goodwill, but there's cause and effect for every selection. And so I would agree it's much more difficult on the design side than it is for the builder side.
I meant to ask you actually when you were talking about estimating specifically. Have you ever either used the words discovery fee, or is that how do you account for sometimes all of these hours associated with estimating for a potential new project?
It's a really good question. I understand the term discovery fee. It's not something I use when I'm communicating with the client, but what I will say, Julie, is that um, again, selling the value. When a client comes to me and says, "Hey, Brad, we want to put the team together. We have our designer, we have our architect. We want you as the builder." You know, we'll speak about what that looks like in vertical construction for cost plus and supervision labor. But the point being is that we have a set fee typically. It hasn't burned me yet, knock on wood. But up to this point, I have a set fee based on my guesstimate of what it's going to take to get to permit. And so that, call it discovery fee, or that fee that the client's going to pay me, does cover me to create an initial budget, right? So I'm going to create,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to say, okay, Brad, here's my lot. So I know where the lot is. I know if it's hillside. I know if it's flat. I know if there's an HOA or not. So, if I need a septic tank or I need a propane, underground propane, or you have city utilities, all these variables, we have a good, we're going to do our research. So we put together an accurate budget on the front end, and that budget is now used for the designer and the architect to design the project. And we have to live within those parameters. But I do tell the client, and this goes back to where I set the expectation, that over the next 6 months, as we're working through design, we are going to have some data points. As we pick appliances, we'll go back and cross check that to our appliance budget. As we, pick some of the countertops, we can reference back. And so we do have these data points, but I do tell the client that they get one and up to two like open bids to the street. And really what that means is I'm going to send it out for bid one time, and I will allow up to two times as we work through value engineering and deductions if we're over budget. But I'm not sending this out to a lot of people. The initial budget is based on our historical data, and we're not engaging getting just random bids over and over and over again, to the trade partners.
Yeah, we've seen, I would say recently, maybe the last year or two, some of our higher end, like AD 100, especially the larger and higher end firms, have done very well with a discovery phase or a discovery fee because you get so many new client inquiries that they may not necessarily be serious. But that initial presentation to a client can be very lengthy and time consuming. So it's really just locking somebody in and allowing you to even pick up 25,000, 50,000. Like a good amount of money for again the initial discovery phase, and I think it's worked very, very well.
Yeah, and it is different. Again, it's a different service and product that the
Mhm.
designers are doing. They're going to be a lot heavier in the front and then heavy in the back when they're doing furnishings. But for me as a builder, I've learned to vet a little bit better. And so, for example, if you were to go to my website, I mean, early on, the inquiries I'd receive, I mean, I'd get hundreds. Can you do a backsplash? Can you do a site fence? Can you do a all over the board? And then, creating, through our CRM, our back end side of our website, I'm asking the client right away, is your budget $700 to $800 a square foot? Is it 800 to 900? Is it over 1,000? So someone coming in say, I want to build a house at $200 a square foot, like a Toll Brothers, as you mentioned, like it's just
Uh-huh.
not something we can do or compete in that market. So ideally, you're trying to weed out just from questionnaires on the front end. So you're kind of limiting, to the ideal client that's already going to be reaching out anyways.
Do you have a minimum spend?
Well, it's a good question. So on the website, yes, but in reality, no, right? I think there's best practice and reality, something I speak about a lot. But the reality is, I want to work for good people. And so,
Mhm.
but to your point, Julie, there is a minimum amount that doesn't make sense for them to hire AFT
Mhm.
because the overhead, I mentioned the supervision and labor and burden rates. If you're doing a $60,000 remodel, because of the staffing that we have and what we pay them, we don't self perform work. It doesn't make any sense to hire AFT because you're going to be paying maybe 60 grand for the work and 30 grand for overhead, right? And so you're better off getting a small contractor that's self-performing the work, that's building margin and plumbing and tile and drywall himself, so, or herself. But so yeah, there's not a minimum spend, but there is a minimum amount that doesn't make sense for the client.
Yeah, and I would say that's the same for a lot of our clients as well, right? The bigger firms definitely have something on paper in terms of a minimum spend, but you could have a really amazing client inquiry, and if you have a firm that likes to Google their clients,
Yeah.
those what could appear to be smaller inquiries could really just be a foot into the door for a really great contract or client or connection down the road. But I do think it gives the client an idea, like you're saying, like for an expectation maybe would be a better word.
Well, in fairness, Julie, I mean, I will say there's a lot of clients I have and have had that started out that were maybe not the ideal project, but that this is where, it's not like we just turn them away because we think they're better than them. Like I've always been a proponent that if a client reaches out and I get a hold of them, that I'm going to put them in the best hands, even if it's not me, and maybe a referral, maybe someone else, and maybe depending on what their product goal is. And when they see that you're acting more as a consultant and a friend than just trying to take every project, because you want to, just take it on, they respect that. And to your point, projects evolve. Like they do evolve. They may come back and be like, you know what, I don't want to do a small remodel. I want to tear the house down and redo the whole house. And all of a sudden you have a client because you gave them great advice. So I think, there are signature projects or there's maybe signature clients that, again, you may call it a lost leader from a sales perspective, that I'm going
Mhm.
to do it just because I can get my foot in the door in this community. So yeah, I think all of us, again, the best practice in reality, I think we all have to have some standard of what we're trying to build our business to. But then, yeah, it gives you the flexibility to do a one-off or a special project, if it can maybe bring you notoriety or marketing or, a relationship that's really important.
Are you in the majority of all 50 states at this point?
I
You
no,
wish.
it's a great question. I mean, this is where we're very different from design. I mean, you have designers, I'm sure, out of New York and other places, Julia, that it's very easy for them to work in other markets.
Yes.
And I say easy lightly, easy in the sense that it's feasible. But the
I mean, like
complication
a
is,
licensing standpoint, yes. Like
yeah,
there's no barrier to entry on the licensing.
right. And they
Yeah.
can design in New
Yeah.
York for that market for a home, but the hard work is now working with the different builders that they may not have experience with, different suppliers and vendors that are local to that area, different codes. And so there's that angle for a builder perspective. It's very difficult because I have to be on site every day for 2 years, right? And you have to have someone living there, a superintendent.
Oh,
You have
wow.
to have a relationship with framers and tile companies. And so you have to have boots on the ground in those markets, which makes it a little bit more difficult for me. As whereas a designer may make 4, 5, 6, 10 trip visits
Mhm.
throughout construction, I'm making 700 visits because I'm there every day for 2 years, right?
Oh, wow.
So it's a different model. And
Yeah,
so
yeah, totally.
currently, I mean, but being open with you, we've only been in Phoenix since we started AFT 12 years ago, March 2013, and so we're right now this month will be our 12-year anniversary.
Oh,
But
good for
we're
you.
Yeah, thank you. But we're doing our first project out of state off the coast of Washington State. It's an incredible build. So but again, I have a superintendent that's willing to travel. We have some connections to that area, and as we've spoken about this conversation, Julia, it's a project that makes sense. We're working with this incredibly high end architect. We just finished a house with Studio McGee, who's,
Uh-huh.
Shay McGee and her team, very successful, and they're going to be on this project as well. So we're doing our second project with Studio McGee. This one's out of state. So again, this is one that makes a lot of sense for us because of the project itself and the team involved.
Well, good. That's amazing. Good for you. That's a
Yeah,
great story. Are you looking to get into, like, I'm just making it up, but like Miami
yeah.
is a hot market, right? Or I don't know, LA as a market. Like, is that on the radar, or only if it's the right fit?
Yeah, I think if it's the right fit, it's funny you ask that because some listening to this podcast may know I had some pretty big aspirations, years ago that I was going to expand into other markets, and it's not off the table. It's just I've realized the amount of work systems protocol, and so we've really focused these last 3 years, I would say, on our systems. From
Mhm.
financial to operations. And once we have that dialed in, it's going to be a lot easier to pivot to other markets. But it's just as a builder, you have to really have a really trusted general manager who's going to run that market because I can't be in every market every day. And Zoom only works so good as a
Mhm.
builder, right? You need to be there. So, but it's a great question. What about for you? I mean, it's tax season, so how are you surviving, Julia?
That's good. That's good. We're surviving. That's good. I mean,
Yeah.
no complaints. Complaining not going to get you anywhere. Busy, which is a good thing. Trying to be as proactive in terms of communication and client management. We've actually also, the last 6 months, started working with a third party consultant to help us with all of our processes, documentation, and I would just really say like all of our written processes. So that's been a great learning curve. That's been great, hard, but really good to hopefully allow us to just service the client better. And again, really, I think proactively communicate instead of reacting. I do feel like we've always been really busy, which is great. But instead of constantly reacting, really trying to proactively communicate with clients, even the last 2 months to say, I could see that your net income is X. Have you thought about doing an S corp conversion?
Hmm.
Um, there are newer clients who have come in for 2024 but haven't maybe paid the correct amount of tax estimates, like, right, making sure that their 2024 return is done timely so that we could make estimated payments for 2025. So it's been great, challenging in its own way. And then it's interesting. I mean, the administration, as we all know, has changed, and like, what will
Right.
that mean for the tax like community, and for rates, and trying to stay on top of all of that, making sure that everybody's filing accrual.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah. Accrual has to. Well, let me ask you this because where I have a lot of respect for you, Julie, is that I think most of us towards the end of the year get burnt out, right? I mean, it's been a long year. The holidays come, for a lot of people. So December is kind of a tricky month, at least in the construction, because a lot of my labor force, they want a break, they're off, they've been working hard the whole year. You're at a point where you have to be very conscious with your clients about where are we at? We're net income. Are we doing financials? That way, especially the accrual, we recognize it as profit. Are we moving it down? And so you're strategizing in a year. You're trying to create budgets beginning of the year. So you have this window from Thanksgiving until March, April that I can only imagine the amount of chaos and time commitment and consulting you're giving to your clientele.
yeah, that's an interesting perspective, right? Because in the design community too, right? December, they're working 50% of the time. I have no comment to that. I don't need to inject my opinion, right? But we're in the reverse, right? And actually, I
Right.
think a lot of us are really happy with the slowness of like emails and things, like the client correspondence that's coming through. And so hopefully we are able to sit back and really decide, right, does somebody need a bonus? Where were they in terms of profitability? Are they an S
Mhm.
corp? Are they not? If they are an S corp, right, does it make sense to bonus? Are we bonusing so they could take some money? Are we bonusing so we could pay taxes and pay all of it to taxes? uh, I would say again, we're year over year, we've consistently done better in terms of that proactiveness, I think you could only improve. Like you can't look at it to be like, oh, we're never perfect. I think we're far from it. Um, but to let the clients know too, and we start like revenue recognition, those conversations, I would say we start those the beginning of Q4, because those firms that are profitable, I mean, that's a non-recorded line conversation to say like, hey, our net income is $1 million. I'm not picking up a dollar because, I projected taxes to be X, or I could see from a cash perspective, we're not going to have the dollars to cover potentially the tax consequences, like in a fashion where it makes me feel good, right? Or makes me sleep at night. So we'll absolutely just hold off on everything having to do with revenue I'm saying to to a reasonable degree, right? But we'll do everything in our power to hold off and manage that. But it's hard. I think it's interesting. We're dealing with creatives,
Hmm.
so I mean, you
Creatives
get
are a very different mindset. For I'm
they're
sure for
different
you, yeah.
mindsets, and like you'll get emails that say, "What's a payment coupon?" And you're trying your hardest. Brad, I know that I mean, I agree with you, but after 5 emails of what's a payment coupon, you have to look in to say like, well, what am I like? Where am I failing in my communication? I'm like, I don't know. Doesn't your utility company have a payment coupon? Like, it's the same thing. The IRS payment coupon, the utility company payment coupon. So I will say we have some really great clients that are amazing, and some of them are really easy where they're like, yeah, you do you, what communicate what you need to communicate, but handle it appropriately. And a lot of times, those are the relationships that work really well. Or you have also another set of clients who just want to learn actually and are really great at accepting feedback and understanding sort of like their limitations on what they know and what they don't know, but then are very open to feedback on what they don't know. And then you have your clients that are the opposite of those two things and are, I think, not open to feedback. And those are maybe you see it in your industry too. Like those are the relationships that are the most challenging.
Yeah. Now everyone sees. I mean, Julia, I think you're probably the easiest person to talk to. Like, and this is why we spoke for like an hour and a half at Four Hands, right? And at
Yeah.
design camp, because like, I mean, you're so inquisitive and your profession so well. I mean, and it
Oh, thank
shows
you.
just on this conversation. So when are you starting your podcast so we can like dive in more intensely?
Yeah, maybe you could be my first guest. Maybe that'll make me feel less scared.
Yeah.
I'm scared. Like that. I'm not a scared, person.
You're
I'm
not
not.
nervous at all. What are you scared about?
It's scary. It's new. It's scary. I'm not the most technologically savvy. Like, I'm mediocre, at best. And you have to keep a conversation going, which that I actually think, yes, that is not the scary part, but you also have to find amazing guests and right and have
Hmm.
it be interesting. Like you want it to be interesting and impactful because otherwise why bother?
Yeah, I know it, and I've told with the same thing. I mean, of course, now I feel like we have a good rhythm, but I think early on it's tough, right? Do I have good guests? Can I have the conversation, especially when you're a solo host, right? It's a little bit more different. Um, but you'd be phenomenal. I mean, just
Oh, thank you.
so
I
it's
love
pretty rare. The reason
this
I
one.
bring it up is it's very rare, and I know just to give the audience a little background. Julie and I have spoken about you doing a podcast, and we had a phone call about it because you're going to be doing that. But what's unique about this podcast is I'm sure Doug will tell me. Doug produces my podcast, and Doug's like, Brad, typically you speak like 15%, right? The ratio is typically like 80, 85% of the guest, and you're like 15, 20. I'm sure today it's gonna be like 50% I'm speaking, which is very rare, but it's because you like interviewed me almost an entire episode. And that's why you'd be a good host because, most guests, they're coming on to speak, because I'm making them come on speak, but you're very much the other way interviewing me. So you already have it in you. You did it today.
I'm a very inquisitive person. But I think that's inherently who we are, right? English is my second language. My very first English word was why. And I remember I used to get made fun of. They were like, is that the only word you know? Uh-huh.
Well, you'd never guess. But Julia, I mean, you've been amazing. I mean,
Oh,
I
thank
feel
you.
like there's so much more that we have to talk about. So we're probably gonna have to bring you on a third one. I'm sure the guests will love that because you've peeled out a ton of information for me. So for those listening that need to go contact you, especially now, maybe you're going to start doing construction finance, you're savvy enough, where can they find you?
Oh, so we are the longest email ever. At Julia at newagefinancialconsulting.com, all spelled out. It's on the website, newagefinancialconsulting.com. That that probably needs a rebrand after 20 years, but here we are.
Well, it's okay. And hopefully next time you'll be on the podcast, maybe a podcast swap or something. So
You will be my first. I will let you know first. Don't you worry.
well, you've been amazing. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
If you get value from the show, please support us by giving a 5-star rating and review on whatever platform you listen to. And I also have a favor to ask. We've had some incredible guests that come on and share their wisdom, their knowledge about their business. So if you have friends or family members that could benefit from those episodes, please share it with them, as well as any other business owners that you're networking with that could get value from the podcast or certain episodes. Please share those as well. Again, subscribe, make sure you're following. Any questions that you have, topics. We've had listeners reach out about certain guests that we should have on the show. Again, brad.l@aftconstruction.com. Email me for topics to address, guests that we should have on, and even if you think you'd be a great guest for the show. So again, thank you for all your support, and we'll see you next time.